So no possibility of medical response to or meaningful preparedness for all-out nuclear war. So we had to prevent nuclear war if we expected to survive. This disconnect was never actually resolved. And what happened was, when we get into Chapter 2 of the nuclear threat era, which started back in 1945, Chapter 2 starts in 1991. When the Soviet Union broke up, we effectively lost that adversary as a potential attacker of the United States, for the most part. It's not completely gone. I'm going to come back to that. But from 1991 through the present time, emphasized by the attacks of 2001, the idea of an all-out nuclear war has diminished, and the idea of a single event act of nuclear terrorism is what we have instead. Although the scenario has changed very considerably, the fact is that we haven't changed our mental image of what a nuclear war means. I'm going to tell you what the implications of that are in just a second. So what is a nuclear terror threat? And there's 4 key ingredients to describing that. First thing is that the global nuclear weapons in the stockpiles that I showed you in those original maps happens to be not uniformly secure, and it's particularly not secure in the former Soviet Union, now in Russia. There are many, many sites where warheads are stored, and in fact, lots of sites where fissionable materials like highly enriched uranium and plutonium are absolutely not safe. They're available to be bought, stolen, whatever. They're acquirable, let me put it that way. From 1993 to 2006, the International Atomic Energy Agency documented 175 cases of nuclear theft, 18 of which involved highly enriched uranium or plutonium, the key ingredients to make a nuclear weapon. The global stockpile of highly enriched uranium is about 1,300 at the low end to about 2,100 metric tons. More than 100 megatons of this is stored in particularly insecure Russian facilities. How much of that do you think it would take to actually build a 10-kiloton bomb? Well, you need about 75 pounds of it. So what I'd like to show you is what it would take to hold 75 pounds of highly enriched uranium. This is not a product placement. It's just, in fact, if I was Coca-Cola, I'd be pretty distressed about this. But basically, this is it. This is what you would need to steal or buy out of that 100 metric ton stockpile that's relatively insecure to create the type of bomb that was used in Hiroshima. Now, you might want to look at plutonium as another fissionable material that you might use in a bomb. That you'd need 10 to 13 pounds of plutonium. Now, plutonium, 10 to 13 pounds, this is enough plutonium to create a Nagasaki-size atomic weapon. Now, this situation already, I don't really like thinking about this, although somehow I got myself a job where I have to think about it. So the point is that we're very, very insecure in terms of developing this material. The second thing is, what about the know-how? And there's a lot of controversy about whether terror organizations have the know-how to actually make a nuclear weapon. Well, there's a lot of know-how out there. There's an unbelievable amount of know-how out there. There's detailed information how to assemble a nuclear weapon from parts. There's books about how to build a nuclear bomb. There are plans for how to create a terror farm where you could actually manufacture and develop all the components and assemble it. All of this information is relatively available. If you have an undergraduate degree in physics, I would suggest, although I don't, so maybe it's not even true, but something close to that would allow you, with the information that's currently available, to actually build a nuclear weapon. The third element of the nuclear terror threat is that who would actually do such a thing? Well, what we're seeing now is a level of terrorism that involves individuals who are highly organized. They are very dedicated and committed. They are stateless. Somebody once said, Al-Qaeda does not have a return address. So if they attacked us with a nuclear weapon, what's the response? And to whom is the response? And they're retaliation proof. Since there's no real retribution possible that would make any difference, since there are people willing to actually give up their lives in order to do a lot of damage to us, it becomes apparent that the whole notion of this mutually assured destruction would not work. Here's Suleiman Abu Gheith, And Suleimani was a key lieutenant of Osama bin Laden. He wrote many, many times statements to this effect: we have the right to kill 4 million Americans, 2 million of whom should be children. And we don't have to go overseas to find people willing to do harm for whatever their reasons. McVeigh and Nichols and the Oklahoma City attack in the 1990s was a good example of homegrown terrorists. What if they had gotten their hands on a nuclear weapon? The fourth element is that the high-value U.S. targets are accessible, soft, and plentiful. This will be a talk for another day, but the level of preparedness that the United States has achieved since 9/11 of 2001 is unbelievably inadequate. What you saw after Katrina is a very good indicator of how little prepared the United States is for any kind of major attack. 7 million shipped cargo containers come into the United States every year. 5 to 7% only are inspected. 5 to 7%. This is Alexander Lebed, who was a general that worked with Yeltsin, who talked about and presented to Congress this idea that the Russians had developed these suitcase bombs. They were very low yield, 0.1 to 1 kiloton. Hiroshima was around 13 kilotons, but enough to do an unbelievable amount of damage. And Lebed came to the United States and told us that many, more than 80 of the suitcase bombs were actually not accountable. And they look like this. They're basically very simple arrangements. You put the elements into a suitcase, it becomes very portable. The suitcase can be conveniently dropped in your trunk of your car. You take it wherever you want to take it, and you can detonate it. You don't want to build a suitcase bomb, and you happen to get one of those insecure nuclear warheads that exist. This is the size of the little boy bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. It was 9.8 feet long, weighed 8,800 pounds. You go down to your local rent-a-truck, and for $50 or so, you rent a truck that's got the right capacity, and you take your bomb, you put it in the truck, and you're ready to go. It could happen, but what it would mean and who would survive? You can't get an exact number for that kind of probability, but what I'm trying to say is that we have all the elements of that happening. Anybody who dismisses the thought of a nuclear weapon being used by a terrorist is kidding themselves. I think there's a lot of people in the intelligence community, and a lot of people who deal with this work in general, think it's almost inevitable unless we do certain things to really try to defuse the risk, like better interdiction, better prevention, better fixing, better screening of cargo containers that are coming into the country and so forth. There's a lot that can be done to make us a lot safer. At this particular moment, we actually could end up seeing a nuclear detonation in one of our cities. I don't think we would see an all-out nuclear war anytime soon, although even that is not completely off the table. There's still enough nuclear weapons in the arsenals of the superpowers to destroy the Earth many, many times over. There are flashpoints in India and Pakistan, in the Middle East, in North Korea, and other places where the use of nuclear weapons, while initially locally, could very rapidly go into a situation where we'd be facing all-out nuclear war. It's very unsettling. Here we go. Okay, I'm back in my truck, and we drove over the Brooklyn Bridge. We're coming down, and we bring that truck that you just saw somewhere in here in the financial district. This is a 10-kiloton bomb, slightly smaller than was used in Hiroshima. And I want to just conclude this by just giving you some information, I think news you can use kind of concept here. So first of all, this would be horrific beyond anything we can possibly imagine. This is the ultimate. And if you're in the half-mile radius of where this bomb went off, you have a 90% chance of not making it. If you're right where the bomb went off, you will be vaporized. And I'm just telling you, this is not good. You assume that. 2-mile radius, you have a 50% chance of being killed, and up to about 8 miles away, I'm talking about killed instantly, somewhere between a 10 and 20% chance of getting killed. The thing about this is that the experience of the nuclear detonation is, first of all, tens of millions of degrees Fahrenheit at the core here where it goes off, and an extraordinary amount of energy in the form of heat, acute radiation, and blast effects. An enormous hurricane-like wind, and destruction of buildings almost totally within this yellow circle here. And what I'm going to focus on as I come to the conclusion here is that what happens to you if you're in here? Well, if we're talking about the old days of an all-out nuclear attack, you up here are as dead as the people here. So it was a moot point. My point now, though, is that there's a lot that we could do for you who are in here if you've survived the initial blast. You have, when the blast goes off, and by the way, if it ever comes up, don't look at it. If you look at it, you're going to be blind either temporarily or permanently. So if there's any way that you can avoid, like avert your eyes, that would be a good thing. If you find yourself alive, but you're in the vicinity of a nuclear weapon, you have, that's gone off, you have 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the size and exactly where it went off, to get out of the way before a lethal amount of radiation comes straight down from the mushroom cloud that goes up. In that 10 to 15 minutes, all you have to do, and I mean this seriously, is go about a mile away from the blast. And what happens is, I'm going to show you now some fallout plumes. Within 20 minutes, it comes straight down. Within 24 hours, lethal radiation is going out with prevailing winds, and it's mostly in this particular direction. It's going northeast. And if you're in this vicinity, you've got to get away. So you're feeling the wind, and there's tremendous wind now that you're going to be feeling, and you want to go perpendicular to the wind or downwind if you are, in fact, able to see where the blast was in front of you. You've got to get out of there. If you don't get out of there, you're going to be exposed to lethal radiation in very short order. If you can't get out of there, we want you to go into a shelter and stay there. Now, in a shelter in an urban area means you have to be either in a basement as deep as possible, or you have to be on a floor, on a high floor, if it's a ground burst explosion, which it would be, higher than the 9th floor. So you have to be 10th floor or higher, or in the basement. But basically, you got to get out of town as quickly as possible. And if you do that, you actually can survive a nuclear blast. Over the next few days to a week, there will be a radiation cloud, again, going with the wind and settling down for another 15 or 20 miles out, in this case, over Long Island. And if you're in the direct fallout zone here, you really have to either be sheltered or you have to get out of there. And that's clear. But if you are sheltered, you can actually survive. The difference between knowing information of what you're going to do personally and not knowing information can save your life. And it can mean the difference between 150 to 200,000 fatalities from something like this and 500,000 to 700,000 fatalities. So response planning in the 21st century is both possible and is essential. But in 2008, there isn't one single American city that has done effective plans to deal with a nuclear detonation disaster. Part of the problem is that the emergency planners themselves, personally, are overwhelmed psychologically by the thought of nuclear catastrophe. They are paralyzed. You say nuclear to them, and they're thinking, oh my God, we're all gone. What's the point? It's futile. And we're trying to tell them it's not futile. We can change the survival rates by doing some commonsensical things. So the goal here is to minimize fatalities. And I just want to leave you with the personal points that I think you might be interested in. The key to surviving a nuclear blast is getting out and not going into harm's way. That's basically all we're going to be talking about here. And the farther you are away in distance, the longer it is in time from the initial blast, and the more separation between you and the outside atmosphere, the better. So separation, hopefully with dirt or concrete, or being in a basement, distance and time is what will save you. So here's what you do. First of all, as I said, don't stare at the light flash. If you can, I don't know how you could possibly resist doing that, but let's assume theoretically you want to do that. You want to keep your mouth open so your eardrums don't burst from the pressures. If you're very close to what happened, you actually do have to duck and cover like Bert told you, Bert the turtle. And you want to get under something so that you're not injured or killed by objects, if that's at all possible. You want to get away from the initial fallout mushroom cloud, I said in just a few minutes, and shelter in place. You want to move downwind or crosswind for 1.2 miles. You know, if you're out there and you see buildings horribly destroyed and down in that direction, less destroyed here, then you know that it was over there, the blast, and you're going this way, as long as you're going crosswise to the wind. Once you're out and evacuating, you want to keep as much of your skin, your mouth and nose covered, as long as that covering doesn't impede you moving and getting out of there. And finally, you want to get decontaminated as soon as possible. And if you're wearing clothing, you're taking off your clothing, you're going to get showered down someplace and remove the radiation that would be, the radioactive material that might be on you. And then you want to stay in shelter for 48 to 72 hours minimum, but you're going to wait, hopefully. You'll have your little wind-up battery-less radio, and you'll be waiting for people to tell you when it's safe to go outside. That's what you need to do. In conclusion, nuclear war is less likely than before, but by no means out of the question, and it's not survivable. Nuclear terrorism is possible, maybe probable, but is survivable.